So they said there's about 18 minutes actually initially, but with the lunch and those things coming in, I'll try to keep it very concise. I hope you people can hear me. Just can you confirm that? Anybody?
Yes, Mohan. Go on.
Okay, thank you. So I'll try to keep it very practical, and we'll talk about some simple medical setups, which could be possibly an emergency room or an outpatient consulting where single clinicians are sitting and working as physician or as a psychiatrist. And I'm going to focus mostly on nicotine and alcohol, and the other speaker is going to speak about the other substances which are involved. First of all, is it important for us to talk about it? Is the question. The answer is a simple yes, because if you just walk out of the room, you will see somebody smoking. And if you see in the early morning hours of the lockdown being relaxed, one of the places where a lot of people are standing is places where they get alcohol. So they need to stock. So what we know is definitely alcohol and nicotine are two common problems which we see in community. The reason we need to talk about it specifically here, especially in medical settings, is because nicotine and alcohol is commonly used. It is less assessed. It is assumed, okay, if somebody says they smoke, many times in a routine practice, we never even ask how many cigarettes, why do they smoke, and those. We just put a note telling he smokes, he's a smoker, or we put the nicotine dependence and move on. We don't assess it completely. Less intervened. We try to intervene less, and we know it takes a lot of time and those things. So we are looking at more other important crises rather than talking to the person about substance. And many times, even as health professionals, we don't offer help to these people when they come in and meet us. Their motivation to take help is less, but our motivation to even suggest help is also equally less many times, is what is noticed. So with this understanding, let me go through some few crucial points before even we talk about some medications, because all of us know about many medicines which are available, but making medicines work, getting the person's motivation high is where the key of succeeding in managing substance use lies. So first of all, as a clinician, it's a good idea to have an idea of spectrum of usage. One side, we might see people who are experimenting usage and have been caught. It is common in young children, for the first time they smoke or drink, the family members catch them and they bring them to the clinic and say, doc, he smoked yesterday with his friends, so what do we do about it? That is experimental use. Then going ahead, you have the social and the recreational use people, where they use it more socially and recreational use. Slowly, a lot of them do remain in the social and recreational use and life moves on. But in some of them, it gets into an abuse level. What do you mean by a level of abuse? When you're talking about abuse level, you're talking about things or a situation where let's imagine they're stressed. Then they think, okay, let me go and drink. Let me go and smoke. Imagine they're going through some worries. They want to go and smoke and drink. So they start using the substance as a comfort, whether it is nicotine or alcohol. Harmful use happens when they already have sustained some kind of a physical or a mental health or a social problem because of the substance. The doctors have told them to stop the substance which we are talking, but despite that, they're not able to stop it. They keep taking it again and again. That is called as harmful use. And the dependence is a full-fledged form of addiction which comes in. Now, as a clinician, it is also important for us to understand there is a spectrum of presentation to us, right? People sometimes come voluntarily. There are small percentage of people who come and say, I do smoke and I want to quit smoking. Can you help me? I do drink. Can you help me? They come voluntarily. Of course, that's a small percentage of people whom we see. Hello?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Okay. Now, involuntary use is the other. Involuntary presentation is even more commoner, where a family member forces them to bring in and those things. So a lot of times spouse or a brother or a father or somebody else in the family brings them in for consulting. Of course, a lot of times in medical settings, you might see substance use people coming in for the first time in emergency rooms for substance related or some other complications. Or many times they come in for many other medical issues and they have comorbid substance use issues. Or sometimes on inquiry, when you ask a person who's otherwise doing fine, do you smoke, do you drink? Then you slowly identify there is a substance use. Why should you know the spectrum of presentation? Substance use problem is not the same for all of them. They might be smoking, they might be drinking, but if you want to deal with any of these people, you have to approach very differently because you want to know what is the level of their motivation, how much are they keen in taking some help, and that is what will decide whether you'll succeed in helping these people with substance use issues. Moreover, as a clinician, we also need to understand addiction in that particular person as well as in general. First and foremost, a lot of times as clinicians over years, we see so much failures in substance use that we become very cynical. We become very nihilistic about approaching substance use because we think things just don't work. But by definition, we need to understand substance use disorders or addiction are considered to be a chronic kind of an illness, and they're recurrent kind of an illness, and they're relapsing in nature. Why is this important? If we drain this into the family member's head, if we drain this into the patient's head, and as a clinician, if we understand that it is chronic, recurrent, and a relapsing kind of an illness, a lot of times we don't lose motivation. We constantly keep helping each other and supporting this journey of getting them to be abstinent or even reduce the substance use. Otherwise, a lot of times they don't come back and meet us because they feel very offended or they feel very dejected that the whole treatment failed. So I think it's important for us to always tell them it can happen that you might slip. Please come back and meet us. We'll try to help you the best way. And keeping that negotiation is a great help many a times. It is also important for us to constantly put across to them that substance use initially is more of willpower, control, and everything else. But as it becomes more progressed, substance use is no more just willpower. If I decide tomorrow morning I will not smoke, it is not like I'm going to stop smoking. It's much more deeper is what you need to understand. It's a brain disease. It involves a lot of areas of the brain, a lot of circuits of the brain, a lot of chemicals of the brain. It involves a lot of past experiences, current experiences, mental health status, physical health status. So understanding the complexity of addiction will give us a lot of room to help our clients in some way or the other. So what is the fourth important step to know? We need to understand before even we try to intervene as a healthcare professional, what is our goal? And whose goal is it? Is it my goal as a psychiatrist or a clinician? Or is it the patient's goal? Is it the patient's family member's goal? We have to ask whose goal are we trying to do and what is the goal we are trying to pursue? Because these are the things which will help us to know how to approach the person. Otherwise, we all know what are the treatments for every substance use problem, but tailor making the situation and kind of understanding the current situation in hand and fine-tuning your treatment processes needs a lot of skill sets. So understanding whose goal is it, what goal are you looking at, and how much of willingness is there from different parties. Sometimes we see the patient wants to get better, but the families are very cynical. Sometimes the doctors could be very cynical. Sometimes the patient himself could be quite demotivated. So you need to look for all these aspects. It is important for us to understand that substance use is like a pink elephant in the room. You have to talk about it at some point of time or the other. You can't assume telling some patient, okay, stop smoking is end of the chapter. You have to talk to them about why they smoke, how much they smoke, when, why, where, how, what, and try to kind of help them in this process. Not talking about it doesn't mean it is no more a problem. Please remember, there are a lot of pink elephants in the room. You need to talk about it. The biggest challenge for talking about it is because there is a lot of professional or doctor or a therapist nihilism. A lot of professionals itself think, okay, if a patient is not motivated, we can't do much about it. Now, if a patient was motivated, you would have already taken help. You need to understand, especially if you're a mental health practitioner, you will see people who are pretty demotivated, who have tried many things and have not worked, who have complex mental health problems. And if you're working in medical setups also, you might see different kinds of presentations. So most of the times, our nihilism is what hinders giving the right support to many people. So sometimes I think we need to understand the complexities of the scenarios and be willing and be ready there to help these people in distress. It is a good idea for us to assess the motivation of the individual who connects with us for substance use problem. What is the level of their motivation? A simple way to remember is PC Damar, Priyanka Chopra Damar. Pre-C-DAMAR. What is PC-DAMAR standing for? Pre-contemplation, contemplation, decision, action, maintenance, recovery, or relapse. A pre-contemplation stage is kind of a stage of denial. The patient is admitted in the cardiac ICU. He has had a massive heart attack. He's been a huge smoker. When you talk to him about smoking, he says, "I don't smoke much, sir. It's okay." So he's completely in denial, despite having a massive MI and serious concerns about his smoking. He simply denies. That is pre-contemplation phase. Contemplation phase is where a lot of medical setting people will see, especially in emergency rooms. What happens is the moment they've got into some serious conditions or they've gone into some health issues and there has been a serious health scare, they start saying, "Okay, sir, I will quit smoking." Now, they don't plan how to quit smoking. They don't plan life after quit smoking. It's a very knee-jerk reaction. They kind of accept a substance is a problem, but they don't have too much of plans on how to deal with it. That is contemplating stage. It is a little better state than pre-contemplation, but contemplation still is not enough. A stage of decision is a stage where they just don't say, "I want to quit." They also make clear-cut decision to quit and are willing to take some steps towards quitting the process. That is where next comes the action stage, where they maybe meet a mental health professional or a counselor or take some anti-craving medications or interventions to take some help to reduce the substance use problem. In the same way, when this action persists and continues for 6 months or more, we call it as maintenance phase. If they recover completely, we call it as recovery. If they relapse, we call it as relapse. So these are the stages of motivation for us to look at. So the client who's sitting in front of us, if we gauge and see in which level of motivation they are, it would help us to kind of deal with their challenges in a much better way. Emergency room is extremely important place for having crucial conversations. Never miss this opportunity is what I can say, especially if you're working in a hospital kind of a setup. And if patients are in emergency room, they are most vulnerable at that time. And it's a most important place where you should never miss an opportunity. And please remember, as a doctor, any amount of brief intervention. You can be just talking about 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, doesn't matter. You're just talking about substance use problems and asking them to quit can be quite effective compared to even rehab admissions and those things. Very brief interventions, especially in the emergency rooms and by physicians, has been shown to be extremely effective. So please don't miss this opportunity of intervening in substance use problems. And most of the times, more than psychiatrists, it is the physicians, it is the other specialty doctors who can do much more positive impact in these kind of scenarios by briefly intervening and talking about it. I'll give you some tips on it in a few slides further. And when you're trying to intervene, you also have to ask yourself, what are you trying to intervene? Are you trying to advise or educate? Are you trying to intervene for the primary problems or the secondary issues or the emergency concerns in hand? So having clarity on what are you trying to intervene, why are you trying to intervene will help us to kind of deal with these substance use challenges uniquely depending on each patient's needs. Talking about alcohol withdrawal, which is one of the common challenges which we see. Alcohol withdrawal state could be very simple to serious problems. Simple withdrawal state, nothing much is required. After they stop, sometimes small doses of benzodiazepine is more than enough. They get better, some hydration, good nursing care is more than enough. They are pretty much okay. But it can also go on to become serious. They can develop seizures, they can develop delirium, they can have Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. Now, what is the importance is you will find it very difficult to say which patient might be remaining only in simple withdrawal, which patient might go on to a serious withdrawal state. That could be the challenge you have, especially if you ill manage the withdrawal symptoms, they might end up having serious withdrawal states. The best simple thing is if they've had past withdrawal episodes, if they had a past delirium state, or if they've had past alcohol withdrawal seizures, that is an indicator to say similar course can happen even this time. So you need to be extra careful and little more kind of intensively treating the withdrawal symptoms and those things. So treating the withdrawal symptoms remains a key by using benzodiazepines. We'll talk about it in just a few minutes' time. It's a good idea for us as a psychiatrist or a physician to always check for these things whenever we're dealing with alcohol withdrawal or alcohol use disorder people. Is there any sleep disturbance? Is there excessive sweating, autonomic arousal, tremors, blood pressure changes, gastrointestinal disturbance? Anxiety, restlessness, especially important, like the previous speaker spoke about, altered sensorium, delirium kind of symptoms, psychotic symptoms, and seizures. The one and the dark black one are very, very important because they are crucial indicators to say that the complication could be a serious withdrawal state and needs to be more aggressively addressed. Not that the blue ones are okay, they also can lead to serious issues, but you need to always look for these challenges. When you're trying to manage the withdrawal of alcohol, very simple thing is all benzodiazepines equally effective. You can choose anything which you are comfortable in using and whichever is available at your hospital or a clinic disposable facility. So benzodiazepines are the key. You have to consider benzodiazepines for alcohol withdrawal state. It is important for us to realize importance of thiamine cannot be ruled out. You have to consider good elaborate supplementation of thiamine. The reason is because you don't want other complications like Wernicke's encephalopathy happening. Now, when you're managing withdrawal, two simple ways of dealing with alcohol withdrawal is when you give benzodiazepines, you can go ahead with a fixed dose regime or a symptom triggered regime. Symptom triggered regime is much more useful because when you educate the family member or the patient and send them back home, even on outpatient basis it works, where if they find increase in heart rate or if they find too much of sleeplessness, if there's too much of sweating, they increase the dosage of the lorazepam or the diazepam, which is given by half to one full tablet. So that kind of symptom-triggered dosaging also could be very helpful, but it needs some amount of cooperation by the patient and the family member, or it can be done in monitored setups. Fixed dose regimes are also effective. Only challenge with fixed dose is sometimes it could be overdose, sometimes it could be underdose. Optimally dosing could always remain a challenge. Even though there are complex formulas, it is still difficult to say which patient, how much dosage is required. It requires a lot of trial and error and a lot of clinical expertise over years. Beyond medications, right, these are a few things which I would like to highlight here, which is also important for other substances also. Brief interventions like 5 A's, asking, advise, assess, assist, and arrange for a follow-up are very, very useful. Another brief intervention strategy is to ask, brief advice, and cessation support, which is extremely useful. Like that, if you see, one of the very important brief interventions which has been very effective is frames approach. What is this frames approach? You have feedback. You give a feedback to the person that this problem is because of the substance. You ask them to take up the responsibility. You advise them what could be helpful. You also give them menu of alternative treatments available. You're also very empathetic during this whole process, and you are also building their self-efficacy over a period of time. These interventions of brief interventions, these techniques of talking to the patients are more effective than many, many medications which are useful. One couple of points I would like to make before I wind up for the talk is when you're talking about nicotine supplementation, very commonly lozenges, gums, and patches are available. A lot of our patients will come and say, "Sir, I have already tried it. My friend said I tried my gum, I tried lozenges, it doesn't work." Please remember, just because they say it doesn't work, don't stop it. First of all, ask them how did they use it. They might have underused it. They have used small dosages, or if they're using a gum or a lozenges, they would be swallowing the juice repeatedly. If they swallow the juice repeatedly, it's known to cause a lot of nausea, gastric irritation, vomiting sensation in those. So they don't like it. It doesn't help them. And the nicotine supplementation is not very effective when they swallow. It is the submucosal absorption which is very important. So teaching them the right way of using supplementation is very helpful. That's one key point which I would like to highlight.
So can
Yeah,
I?
yeah.
So we have
Yes.
another 3 minutes to conclude the session, sir.
Yes, I'll wind up, sure. So when you're talking about craving management, we have drugs like bupropion, naltrexone, and varenicline. Bupropion is a very useful antidepressant and as well as an anti-craving drug which can be considered. Varenicline is also very effective. In Indian population, the biggest challenge is too costly, which makes it very difficult in terms of handling. When you're talking about alcohol, disulfiram is pretty much available and is a very good strategy strategy of aversive drug. But let me highlight a very important point, especially if there are physicians out there. There's a lot of pressure by family members asking us to give some drug which can make them stop drinking. Please understand, disulfiram is to be prescribed in people who are motivated and are consenting to take disulfiram and know the challenges which can happen with the disulfiram ethanol reaction. Then only prescribe it. Avoid it in patients with psychosis and peripheral neuropathy. It's a good idea to talk with a mental health professional and then start on disulfiram if there is a need. One last point I would like to make up here is alcohol anti-craving drugs are many: acamprosate, naltrexone, topiramate, SSRIs, ondansetron, baclofen. We have many drugs in our arsenal. We can try various drugs at various points of time, which could be very helpful. What I would like to emphasize with this small talk here is I think more than the medications and other things, it is our motivation and openness to help these people and keep constantly them in our kind of loop of healthcare system. Because when we keep them in touch and when we keep them in loop, at some point of time, we will be able to help their substance use problem. Our motivation to help them is even more important than the patient's own motivation to quit the substance. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'll be willing to take up in the Q&A session.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan Sunil, sir. So can we continue with the session? We'll take up the questions later on. Yeah. Dr. Satish Ramay, sir.